am immortal.
Welcome back, Mere Mortalites, to an edition of Musings. It is the 28th of June here on a Wednesday, 7 p.m. Brisbane Eastern Standard Time. So
Correct.
you can find us live as we are right now, or you'll be tuning in a little bit later on.
A couple of days later.
Musings is a chance for us to have a conversation on a particular topic, something deeper than you find in our meanderings, longer than you find in our book reviews, probably smarter than you find in anything else that we actually post out there, including talking about Elon Musk. And in today's Musings, we want to have a bit of a conversation around questions and interviewing and asking the right questions. So you posted something along with this particular podcast in that we've done 91 conversations / interviews, and some you can find really quite... I think that's right. Now you can find quite a lot of them quite easily. Some of them we've kind of hidden them they were from ages ago when we moved around a couple of channels. But you asked a pretty cool question on the last meanderings where it was all about questions, and it was off the back of a podcast that we both have listened to now, which was Andrew Huberman interviewing Tim Ferriss. And so a kind of combination to that, I went, hey, this is quite interesting. So look, today's musings might be a little bit of a jump around, and that's just going to happen when something a little bit funner. It's a fun topic, but I thought, hey, let's deep dive into this because we've now interviewed a lot of people. I've got quite a lot of experience in actually interviewing in terms of hiring or various processes, and just the finding out what's the importance in questioning, in the work that goes in beforehand and everything else. So I think the place I wanted to start here with, and there's a lot of places, tendrils that we can have a look in this, is we'll go to that particular interview that we were both just recently actually listened to. I don't know if you've actually listened to the whole thing.
I just got through it.
I sort of chopped it up, and we'll see as to why I kind of chopped. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just chopped through a few things. So in particular, it was Andrew Huberman recently interviewing Tim Ferriss. Now, Andrew himself is a undeniably great podcaster, great orator, has an incredible amount of information in his brain, and the way he presents it is awesome. So Huberman podcast, amazing. Tim Ferriss, no introduction. I got to talk to him, and we'll kind of go into this a little bit as well in terms of I shit my pants when I talked to him over online, and I still haven't been able to actually get that copy of that conversation. But in any case, two great people to have conversations with. And one thing that we noticed, both of us, was, man, can you see how long, he's actually having a bit of a conversation or asking the question and getting to, kind of like what I'm doing right now. I'm putting all this big pretext before something coming through. I think the particular question I was going to ask for you is, aside from that big amount of pretext of information that Andrew sort of provided or was trying to ask questions for Tim Ferriss, where was there other things that called out to you that were, hey, that seems a bit off. That doesn't seem familiar to me from either Andrew, or that doesn't attract me in terms of a good interview question path that they're prevailing through.
Yeah. Just before I answer that, so we're up to 90 actually, not 91.
90.
So just trying to get that extra little one in there, just to impress everyone at home, And the other reason we brought this up and we changed it slightly was I also listened to Tim Ferriss interviewing Kevin Kelly, and that's one where you can actually see, okay, yeah, Tim Ferriss is legit. He's really, really good at what he does. And so, yeah, as you were mentioning, I haven't really seen much of Andrew Huberman before. I might have listened to him on one or two others, and he is really good when he's explaining things, but that doesn't necessarily carry over into being a good interviewer per se. And there's a difference, I guess, between interviews and conversations, and I'm not exactly sure which one he was trying to do there, because it was kind of in between a little bit. And yeah, I got a bunch of things from it, which was just kind of analyzing him, and there was three that I really picked out, which I think might be of use. So asking what's a good question? What I found was I think you need to have some genuine interest behind it. This is probably where he kind of ticked off in a good point. He did seem genuinely curious about what Tim was asking. But then again, even towards the end, he's asking about the Cock Punch NFTs, and I'm kind of does he really care? It was kind of
a bit of forcefulness to the question. Yeah, it was, and to be honest, I mean, obviously for myself, given I know a lot of the context. Perhaps the way he asked it did help the audience that were listening, because that's the thing. It's also who you're interviewing someone and for what purpose. But at least from my perspective, I went, you can kind of tell there's not enough back prep here, that maybe the information that he's sourcing, it's basically just it's a word, it's a name, as opposed to, hey, there's already a lot of information out there that you could have kind of led in with to show that you've done quite a bit of research.
Yeah, it's something Tim's obviously spending a lot of time doing. Does it need to come up necessarily? Do you need to hit on every single thing that a person is doing? I would say no.
An example of a good interview, something that went well, and it hits a couple of points which I went, hey, this is where Andrew Huberman in the conversation with Tim or interview with Tim probably miss out. So here's a couple of call-outs. Your conversation with Adam Curry, the Podfather, and I think Adam even called it out during the interview / conversation, which was, wow, you did your prep. You've done your prep, You've done your homework, you've done your research. And I think that definitely can be a big proponent to a great interviewer, a great set of questions, because you've done the amount of homework necessary, or your team has done the homework necessary to ask the great questions. That's seen in people like Lex Friedman, Tim Ferriss, a few others. Whenever you listen to a Lex Friedman podcast, dude, he's got such a myriad amount of questions. It's like, wow, where are all these coming from? Sometimes they're sourced from the internet, sometimes he gets from somewhere else. Tim has a staff who helps him out in terms of sourcing a lot of information and gathering that information. But what seemed to me lackluster in the Andrew Huberman conversation and some of those questions, it was kind of showing through when you had that conversation with Adam Curry, and you could see that research, or that really taking the time to think about, hey, what am I going to particularly ask him? What's the thing that's valuable for me to be asking him? What's going to be valuable for our listeners to actually take away? So you could see that a lot of that had been done. And
he did have notes, to be fair. He did have notes. You could see, I watched the video version of it, so you could see him looking down, and he had his sheet of notes. So there was definitely some sort of preparation, and particularly I'd say in the earlier questions when he was asking about a specific stuff related to what was it? It was like self body composition or self testing, essentially, doing all of these random things. And Tim would be mentioning this offhand glucose monitor that he used, and before the internet was basically even a thing, and how he had to stick it into his body and whatnot. And Andrew knew about this. He was saying, "Oh yeah, I remember that thing, and I remember that thing." Those were the areas. I guess it was almost sticking to his wheelhouse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think, but that calls out to what you were talking about with the curiosity, as in, hey, when you're curious about it, or when you know about it, for sure you're going to have a big conversation about it. But it kind of shown when in an interview or a conversation, when you're talking about something, like, honestly, if I was to interview you about handstands, or have a conversation about handstands, it can only get so far, unless I'm really asking questions where I'm going to be learning from it, because I just don't know about it, right? So if I'm having a conversation with you, it's either it's going to be semi-selfish, and sometimes people like Tim Ferriss and a few others call us out. Hey, I'm asking this quite selfishly, maybe in the knowledge that a few other people know about it, but or want to know about it, but particularly, hey, it's going to be beneficial for you. Cool, you're kind of calling that out. But for me, there's going to be a certain limit where, if someone's listening to that podcast and they want to know really quite advanced techniques about one-handed handstands, they're not going to get it from this conversation. And if I ask you about, hey, let's talk about one-handed handstands, and you start telling me some details, it's not like I'm genuinely going to be curious enough to ask more. No, nor know where to go down that path as well. So in terms of asking good questions, it's also knowing your own limitations and your own curiosity. I honestly think that conversation that Andrew had with Tim could have been a hell of a lot better if they just stayed on fitness and health. Fuck talking about cock punch, unless there was a stipulation made like, hey, you must ask these particular questions. So I don't know if you found anything else really worth mentioning at all.
Yeah, a couple of things. So what I find usually in a good question is one that's unexpected or surprising, to kind of trigger a new pattern of thought for the guest, or a different perspective. Because especially if people appearing on shows, let's just take Adam Curry for example, he has been on a whole lot. I was going through basically all the ones I could find, and I didn't even scratch the surface, I don't feel, of all of the stuff he's done, because he's been in media for, what, almost like 5 decades. There's just so much
Long
stuff of him
time.
out there. And what he did like, though, and I found this after the fact, was he kind of liked how I started off with a funny one about his castle. It was obviously something he'd never been asked before. How do you go about choosing a castle? Is it based on the amount of peasants you can see per square inch from your top turret? Is it about the mustiness of the smell? Yeah, it was something. It's just it didn't even have to be lighthearted or funny. It was just obviously something he'd never been asked before, and that's probably really refreshing for someone like Tim Ferriss, who has been on a whole bunch of shows, and so he will get a lot of the same questions. What was it? Tell me about how you invested in Uber. How did you know that was the right decision? I bet he's heard that so many times. How often has he heard about? I, for example, would, if I ever got the chance to, this would be a risky one. I'll say it here. If I ever got the chance to speak to Tim Ferriss, one of the things I would love to know is how much he considered, and this would be such a risky thing to bring up. It could go absolutely terribly wrong. But I would like to know how he would know, because he would know the stats on childhood trauma and memories of children between the age of 2 to 4. How can he be certain that whatever his traumatic experiences that he had actually did happen? Because it is very easy to conjure up bad memories or false memories or things that never happened. Especially like 2 to 4 year olds, you don't really remember things at that age from the kind of scientific literature. And so I would kind of want to ask him about that. But boy, would that be a risky thing to bring up.
Yeah, that's definitely. And here comes that. And I think it's good you touch on this, because in asking the right questions, or the good questions as an interviewer, you kind of also have to know where your boundary sits with someone. So let's take that point with Tim Ferriss. If we were to go and have this conversation with, so I got the chance to ask Tim a very direct question, and again, I was like thinking of all these things I could potentially ask him, and ask him. To be honest, when I reflect on it, I go, that was a stupid question. There was way better questions I could have asked. And, of course, I thought like 1,000 other ones that I could have asked him. Whatever.
How much prep time did you have?
Not much. It was one of those that submit some questions, see if you get to ask them. I got to ask it. It was kind of a dumb question. There's a lot better ones that I could have asked. Whatever. However, it made me think there's probably some really, as you say, like spicy questions, interesting questions that would be worth asking like that, maybe others. But it might not also be an opportune time, nor timing, nor your relationship with someone to go ahead and do that. So here's a direct example for myself. Nic Blair. I had a conversation with Nick just after he sort of sold Search Factory, or was coming off sort of a year after Search Factory got sold. And that was very early days, right? I had a follow-up conversation with him.
I'll bring up the actual date now.
Okay. I think it was 2020. Might have been early 2020.
Oof. Yeah.
So I had a second conversation with him not too long ago, and that was great. And it's only now
6 months ago was the second one.
There you go. 6 months ago was the second one.
And the first one, I'm just coming to it now. Sorry to interrupt. It's so much that it's in the old section, which I don't have access to.
I was going to say, yeah. So it'll be in the old section. Yeah. So way back in the day. Now I went, hey, I've done 2 conversations. And you probably see this with your conversations with Pete, in terms of it takes a few to kind of get enough of a role and to know what to ask, what not to ask, what to pry into, unless you are given some sort of introductory setup prior to it, or you almost have a few minutes before the actual session to kind of get warmed up, have a separate conversation, and get to know each other. At least for me, I find it that it's rare that on the very first go, that sort of thing happens. And I don't know if you've found you've done any conversation interview where in the first go around it, was, oh yeah, I feel really comfortable to ask those very deep questions or very spicy questions. And there might be some people, to be honest, like they can handle that. But I would say, yeah, look, that would be interesting. But I think it's got to be the time, the place, the audience, and the relationship that you have. Because, yeah, what's the risk versus reward in that particular example? You might get an answer from him, but there might also be the risk that he goes, yeah, you know what? No, I don't want to talk about that. That's pretty low. That's whatever. Done. And then you go, okay, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't have brought that up in the first place.
Yeah, that gets onto the kind of art of it, which I've got a couple of like a full section just based on the art of asking a decent question. The last one, so I had the kind of deep curiosity with it's got to have the kind of reflection on it. And deep curiosity doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be prepped that well. I think Joe Rogan is pretty good at this. One of the reasons he is so popular is he has that curiosity, but he doesn't necessarily have to have done the research. I know he has sometimes, but he can't have for all of the 2,000 episodes. Probably half of them are with people that he knows and are his friends. So those ones you can kind of scratch off. But for those other 1,000, there's no way that he has done what you would call real deep research or anything like that. But his style is just to have a conversation, just two bros getting together. And very similar to, I think, Larry King back in the day. I never personally watched him, but I believe that was his style. He wouldn't do any prep, or maybe he was the one who had questions and he wouldn't deviate from them no matter what came up in the conversation. So there are many different styles. The last one that I had was, I think it's good to include the reason why it's being asked. What's the point of information if there's kind of no purpose to it? So you could have someone on as a guest, and then you could ask them the typical questions that you get to prove that who you are when you're logging into a bank account and you've forgotten your password, and you have to do those security questions. What was the name of your second cat or second pet? You could ask those questions, but there's no point to it. So I actually quite like it when the interviewer can get the reason for why they're asking it into it as well, which that was kind of probably one of the things lacking from Cock Punch. Andrew Huberman asked Tim Ferriss, but I didn't know why he was asking him. It was kind of seemed like a random thing for him to be asking, because there was no kind of prep to it.
Yeah, and looking at that particular point, so going forward as an example, and hopefully I can recreate it someone with hopefully the conversation I'm going to have with Jeff, the second conversation. First one, I felt like it was a case of asking someone who was an expertise in a particular area in Bitcoin / monochrome fund, and going, cool, I want to just give me some information. I'm just going to ask something.
Yep.
Where the second one, it's very much that it's, hey, I want to have a really good think, whether it's through the conversation or beforehand, on why am I asking this particular question? Is it a personal question? Is it this seems uncertain in the media? Can you provide a spotlight on it? Or is there something that he's seeing from his particular lens? So you're absolutely right. I think a great interview / conversation, some will usually find themselves asking the question or in relation to the why, or what's the reason this is being asked, or for who is the question being asked for. Because, I could see that a question might be asked on behalf of a friend, of someone individually, like, Tim Ferriss always calls out, selfishly asking the question. And so you at least have an N of one of, okay, this is serving that person. There's a reason why it's being asked.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to get into the art or the actual our styles? Because I think we have different styles as well.
Let's go Boostagrams first. I'll deviate even completely. Let's go Boostagrams. Then I think we'll go to the art of it, and then we'll go into our styles.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Sounds good.
So let me just bring this up here. I've got it on my phone in terms of the latest Boostagrams that we've gotten coming through so far. And we'll stick around, of course, because we'll tell you exactly how you can come around and help us out in that regard. So to the Boostagrams, let me just scroll back up. I've got from here, from the 22nd of June. always the dependable Dave Jones. Weekly boost for the Mere Mortalite Nation, 12,112 sats.
So
Dave,
good
you
to
are
us.
single-handedly putting my kid through to private schools in the future when Bitcoin hits $10 million. Dude, this is helping out so much. But no, really, Dave, continuing in, week out, very much appreciated, mate.
And not just for our show as this kind of support. He helped me out tremendously this week by doing some stuff related to the Value for Value show. He didn't need to. I was kind of asking for a special favor, but he went out of his way and helped me out. So that was awesome.
Look, it's amazing. Look, don't let me forget as well to call out the big boosts coming through without a message.
Yeah.
We also had.
Do you have? Can you hear my phone also beeping?
Yes.
The duk-duk? Okay. All right.
I can indeed.
I won't do that.
So I can see as well I don't know if this was a double up. Looking forward to the third season of your V for V podcast, 2,222 sats sent using Customatic, and then kind of sent it again using Customatic. So I'm not too sure. Now, that didn't come through with a particular name attached to it either.
So I do have a answer for that. So basically, we actually found a bug. Me and our little friend then, Gene Bean, who sent that through. And so what that bug was that Customatic wasn't sending the name of the person when it was going through. And so he sent a whole bunch there. But obviously from those, his name wasn't attached to it. So those were all Gene Bean. And yeah, that was very handy to get those and be like, oh, there's actually a bug here. So hopefully we have fixed that.
Now, is Jim Bean the one that follows up as well?
Yes.
Cool. So he says, I'd suggest breaking Mere Mortals into distinct shows. I'd be more likely to subscribe to interview ones like this episode. Right now, I only listen when I see something on the socials or hear about it on another show. And that's 2,222 sats sent using Customatic.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the reasons. If you check out the monthly goals that's coming up, you'll see that's one of the things I wanted to discuss with you in there.
Here we go. We're splitting it up, boys. Now we got a big boy boost coming through from Nick. Fantastic job, Kyron. The perfect primer for anyone who is new to this whole thing and is wondering what it's all about. We'll add this episode as an additional resource to the Founder Podcaster Guide. 21,000 sats sent using Fountain.
Yeah. So that's the Fountain Podcast Guide that he's adding that to.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, that really, really nice for him to say that, to do that. And it's I did put a lot of effort to it, so I'm glad it's kind of resonated with some people.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, dude, you had so much. You showed me the little notes that you had for it as well, so it was pretty cool to see how big it was.
The little notes.
Here's another one. There was just a tester from us confirming the split for Chris. 1,000 sats sent using Fountain.
Yes, because that was what Gene Bean was saying. There's no split for Chris, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I put one in. I'm pretty sure it's there. And
damn.
I was indeed correct.
Gene Bean then sent another one. I'm loving this episode. 4,096 sats sent using Podverse, and then another one from Gene Bean. I love the idea of doing beneficial things with the methane. That's a byproduct of energy production. 2,222 sats sent using Podverse.
Nice.
Man.
Nice.
Gene Bean's all over it. Now, Gene Bean, another one. Great episode. 10,000 sats sent using Podverse.
It's just hitting us hard.
Gene Bean, you're almost at shirt level, dude. He's honestly almost at shirt level.
Wouldn't be too far.
We have another one from user 5564063725337392. Thank you.
Nice.
Smiley face. 100 sats sent using Fountain. And then one from McIntosh. If people don't ever question your message, maybe you don't have the right message. What a fun topic. 2,100 sats sent using Fountain. Thank you very much, McIntosh.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And what was that other one as well without the message?
Oh, geez, man. So my phone, the reason I had all that beeping going on before was because my phone has died on me because I didn't...
I believe that was 5,000 sats. I can't remember from who, but there was no message. So thank you very much to that individual.
Yes. Thank you for the unnamed people boosting in
and streaming as well.
And streaming, yeah. The streaming is always very much appreciated.
Look, we'll talk about it at the very end of the podcast as well. But again, it's that sort of support, which allows us to do the things we do, continue to do it. At this stage, it's just making ends meet. Fucking fantastic. But the more support we get, the more we can grow this. And as we saw in a comment there, allows us to expand the universe of Mere Mortals. I'm going to transition that straight away. Universe. How much do you know about the Marvel universe?
Bits and bobs. I've seen bunches of the movies, but I'm not a fanboy.
Correct. So let's talk. So we're going to go into the art of interviewing, or the art of having a conversation. Tim Ferriss recently had a conversation with, and I want to make sure I get this guy's name correct, David Maisel, I believe his name was. Let me just bring it up quickly. Yeah, David Maisel, Maisel, of Marvel Studios fame. Once again, here's Tim, just crushing it in terms of that was as far as he knows, it's the first long form conversation of anyone's ever had with David. He was the guy who basically created Marvel universe, and in that particular podcast conversation, he went through and dissected on beginnings, where he started, how he got his connections, how he built up in Hollywood, how he went through to Marvel, talked to really massive players, which was sort of like the Disney chairman and CEO and stuff like that, and made it what it was, and took it from like a bankrupt studio basically because he wanted to be a studio head to selling it for $4 billion to Disney and all this sort of stuff. Dude, I never even heard of this dude.
Yeah.
But here comes the art of the interview or the conversation. It appeared to me that Tim had maybe a precursory conversation with this guy beforehand. So maybe, it's kind of like meeting someone one-off. But the ability to follow, when people say, hey, it's a science and an art. Yes, there's definitely a science. Tim was prepared. Tim had information. Tim's done a truckload of conversations or interviews or podcasts. He knows how to talk. But in this particular episode, I'll probably call it out. It's easily in the top 5 of my favorite podcast ever. Dude, I wanted to listen to this at all positions. I was listening to it when I was doing workouts and I was driving. Like, I just wanted to finish this particular episode. Insanely good. And he actually said he was going to do a follow-up with this guy. And it made me really consider all of the things that we were just talking about of what makes it good. Hey, objectivity, fairness, you're flexible, you're preparing, all of these things. You think about the good questions. But that interview, and what made it good was, holy shit, the art of the flexibility of what they're talking to, the fun of, when you make a joke. Always I think of Dave Chappelle, when you make a joke and then you pull the same type of joke like 20 minutes later and you kind of like bring it all together and you bring it all together again. Tim was just doing that effortlessly. He'd be able to kind of pause the conversation, continue a stream, join it back, keep on going. And it felt like it was crafted. Like, it honestly felt like it was crafted. But it was the case that it was just the art of two people having a conversation about things that they're curious about, asking genuine questions that made it really, really fun. So my question to you was, and you brought up the art, what do you see, whether you can, register it as actually something fundamental you can describe or something you can't? What is the art of interviewing that goes, oh yeah, that's a little extra that makes it just so good?
I think it relates to things you can and can't control. I was having a bit of a reflection on just stuff that I've done wrong in interviews, or times where I remember, man, I screwed that up. One example or two examples here are, if you frame the question, even though it's the right question and you're interested in it and you want to talk about it and the guest knows a lot about it, if you frame it wrong, if you bring it up in the wrong way, it can just fall flat. So 2 for me were Emmett Lewis, and when we started talking about his kind of like Taoism training and his kind of religious, not beliefs, but kind of what he was doing with that. I brought it up in this way where I didn't mean to. Even listening back to it, I'm kind of like, I think he could have just been interpreting this slightly wrong. But I think he got the impression where I was trying to make the comparison between that and something which is really kind of more on the woo-woo side of spiritual things, which I didn't want to do. It was just the way that I brought it up didn't go great. Another one, when I was talking with Sam Sethi, and I was asking, have you taken anything from Fountain? Asking kind of if he was using some of their ideas in his own app. And once again, I'd just been talking with him about how he was in the whole technology space and gamification space for decades. And then I asked him about this app, which just, came out earlier than his did, if he was kind of taking ideas from that, and I could see that one fell flat because he was like, no. And then goes on, and it was okay. Neither of those screwed up the conversation. Neither of them were irrecoverable mishaps, like potentially asking Tim what I would ask him, or maybe want to ask him. That would potentially be one which is just irrecoverable. If he takes that the wrong way, there's potentially no coming back from that. So there's definitely ones where it's just the framing. I can control that. But what about all the stuff that you can't control? The setting, if it's you've got a woman on, it's her time of the month. If it's bad days on either end, sickness, home life, if Mercury is in retrograde and the fifth moon is appearing behind Saturn. There's just stuff that you can't control. The Adam Curry one, the guy outside my window started his lawnmower at 8:30 a.m. I think. And I was just going, hey, you piece of shit. This is like one of the hyping myself up for the biggest guest I've had on, the one I've done the most research for, and then this guy starts up a lawnmower.
Of course,
it didn't make a difference, but that was one of the ones where if I let it, that could have annoyed me.
That could have gone through. Well, I even claim things like this as the art of podcasting and not the science of podcasting, and it's actually something that I've started to do myself now. Example with Jeff, which is something that Tim and I can't remember who else, someone else sort of did this, but specifically I'll give the example here again of Tim Ferriss, which is he generally asks people, and I believe he asked David Maisel of the same question, which is when they're going to the podcast, they're going to have a conversation. Now, doesn't just have to be with an interview, it could be with other things. But he asked the person that he's going to interview, hey, what's the one or two things you really want to get across? What's the message that you really want to talk about? Which generally, to be honest, I haven't done that at all. I just kind of go in with, this is what I want to ask, this is what I assume my audience wants. And it's sort of hearing that, okay, what's the things that you really want to talk about? And then the other aspect is, what would, listening back to this particular interview or conversation would make it a home run? What would make it an amazing listen that you'd be really happy that you have done this? And so I found myself doing that with Jeff in terms of I sent a message to Jeff saying, hey, I want to talk about these things, but what are the things that you would really want to talk about? And you'd find a lot of joy and you'd go like, yep, that was really valuable for me to talk about this. And I kind of find that more on the side of art as opposed to science, because you kind of have to tailor that quite distinctly to each person. Not each person wants to care about bringing the most value to their audience, because you have to know there's a particular, this is going to the, not woo-woo, into quite the reality of, different people want different things. As in, when you're going somewhere, not that you're manipulating, but you are wanting to extract something from the interchange that you're doing. When we have these conversations here, we're putting some value out into the world. We want to receive value because we're imparting value to you, right? That's the value for value model. Same thing when we have interviews, when you're having conversations with people. You're trying to get something, whether it's listenership, you getting an answer from something, you getting an answer for someone else, audience, perhaps it's a bit of a crowd. But the person you're bringing on, they kind of want something too. Is it to have a fun conversation? Is it to speak about a particular thing and promote something? Is it to try to connect themselves with a broader audience? So you kind of have to extract that it's not a scientific thing. It's that's the art. It's understanding really at the core mere mortals. It's, okay, do I understand what Jeff wants? Do I understand what Adam Curry wants? Do I understand what Nick wants? Do I understand what Emmett wants? And then being able to both extract it in the before interview and then during the interview, and really being able to massage that to go, oh, okay, cool, we're venturing now into the path of what seems to be promoting. But I know that he doesn't want to promote. I don't want to promote. We really want to be just having a fun conversation. Cool. Fuck that. Like, you almost just obliterate that particular path that you're going down and go, hey, that's that, but let's get back onto this, or let's talk about this. And I think that is really an art. I don't know if you could really put it out into an algorithm or scientific way, or put it down into some, teachable, trainable aspect. I think that is very, very unique and individual, almost to the point that you just have to do more of it to really learn how to do it.
It's like the art, I guess, of karma, or of being a good person and good things happening to you. That's one of the things you'll hear your parents say, but you know, where's the science to back it up, mum and dad? Where's the scientific studies? There's none. It's kind of an intuitive thing that you hope, that you kind of think is right, and if you do it often enough over the long term, yes, you'll probably start to see enough and have enough personal experiences where you can go, yeah, you know what, being a good person, being kind to people, will that kind of karma will come back around to me. There's no proof to it, but I kind of feel like that's the same with interviews. If you're coming at it from a good place, you're not trying to do a gotcha type moment, or you're not coming at it because you want this guest on because you think it'll improve the stats on your podcast, which will get you more viewers and will then, if that's the reason you're getting guests on, I think that will show up in the long run. And you won't be able to point to any particular thing and say, yeah, this is where you can tell they just wanted to get them on for their name alone. But it's kind of in that underlying surface. It's one of those things that kind of comes out in the end in perhaps other actions. So very much the art of it, but and then vice versa. If you are cheeky enough, if you're confident enough, if you're charismatic enough, you can really get away with any question, as long as you're doing it for the reason because it'll draw something out of your guest, or you think it'll be a memorable moment, or it's just one you had to ask, even though it doesn't fit in with anything else. If Andrew Huberman just had to ask about the cock punch one, I'm sure we would have both been saying like, yeah, he didn't really know what he was talking about, perhaps, but he was just something good in the way that he said it made sense.
Now, you speak about Andrew Huberman again. I think it leads me to the conversation, or the point now of where we find ourselves in the way that we ask questions. And one of the things I was going to say was, between the way that Andrew, and again, if people haven't listened to that particular conversation from Andrew Huberman and Tim, go listen to it so you can actually see what we're talking about. But I kind of think that personally, where I'm trying to land myself, where I have conversations, and this is just podcast, not podcasts, talking with people, asking questions when I'm having meetings, whatever it may be, somewhere in the middle between how Andrew Huberman was sort of asking those long-winded questions, and maybe the likes of how Alex Friedman asks his questions, which are just, bam, here's a sentence question, answer it. Because I think those two levels of extremes you can have difficulties with. Too long, too verbose, you kind of run the risk of, what question are you asking? Is it too many questions? Does it really get to the point? Too short. Lex Friedman had a conversation with Jocko Willink. Wasn't good at all. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It was one of those, like, Lex hit a very direct question. Jocko's going to hit it back with a very direct question. It was like almost
Direct
like
answer,
one word answers. And you're like, okay, this is not a conversation. It's an interview gone very, very sharp. Somewhere in the middle is kind of where I strive to be, where it's, and we just talked about it, giving enough information as to, here's my question and the why, so that when you're answering it, you understand why you're answering it. That's one part. But two, almost trying to not elaborate the point too much, which we can just, that's a natural tendency to go, especially when it's someone that you're either impressed by, or you look up to, or you just want to, almost show your intellect to. No, you don't have to do that. You can kind of keep it to enough. And enough is, hey, what information do I need to provide so that this person can adequately answer it with enough ploy to who it needs to be, deploy to. I don't know what you think about that in terms of the length of the question or the information that you would provide, or how you would do it, how you do it now personally, or your style.
One of the things I think I've learned was, just actually, here's a couple of things. So one was about research and how it almost has two purposes. One of them is to avoid the stuff that you hear everywhere, and that can just be monotonous. But I think one of the more important things is it is kind of impressing your guests. They do go, like this guy actually has done some research. He does care enough to have done something. And here's just an example: the Sam Sethi. Someone reached out to me and asked about the adoption story that he had, and so this was a podcast where he particularly went on, and it was about fatherhood talks, I think, something like that. And it was a very specific podcast about Sam Sethi's adoption story. And because I asked that, someone wanted to know, where I want to listen to that.
Where did you
Where
get that information from?
And so, of course, I passed that on. And I think that's one of the stuff where it's, if I hadn't gone to that depth, people probably, I wouldn't have had that opportunity for that person to ask me and then to help them in that way. That being said, you've got to balance it by giving them the surefire hits. I'm very much like you, where it's, I kind of want to give the reason for the question, but then try and get it out of the way is kind of quicker and better than not. But then sometimes you just got to let them, if it's something like you said, if you ask them beforehand and they want to talk about these 2 or 3 things, if it's something that you're not caring about, well, you probably do have to ask at the very least, or try and find a way to make them interesting. When I had Adam Curry on, I didn't ask him anything about MTV. I just had no interest in his time there. I mean, I could have found something, but I was much more interested in value for value. This kind of hidden section of him from 2005 to 2020. That's 15 years, and kind of people gloss over that. No one really asks them that deeply about that whole time period. That's the kind of stuff I really want to know. So yeah, those two. Here's something for the Mere Mortalites at home that might not know. We actually had a prep sheet that we used to send guests. We would have a 2-page document. It's still probably in our drive somewhere. It's worth keeping that around just for historical purposes. But we made it it used to be massive. We just barely fit it into 2, and it's like, this is how long you can expect the podcast to be. These are the type of questions that we'll want to focus on. This is the type of thing we'll provide clips for you, and all of this sort of stuff. And I remember doing that for the family podcast right at the beginning. I can't remember what that was. Probably I think the first 15 episodes, somewhere in there. But one of the first 15 conversations, and I over prepped, and I could tell they came in expecting
a conversation.
No, they came in expecting an interview.
Right,
that's what they were expecting. I'm going to ask them, questions really specific. Probably it's going to be like this. And I don't think they ever felt comfortable with interrupting me when I was saying something, kind of giving an explanation. And so they didn't have, they were just pretty much expecting, oh, here comes the question. Now it's my turn to answer. It's a real
gotcha.
This and this. Whereas conversation, it's much better if you interrupt and I interrupt, or and things like that. So yeah, those are a couple of things that I've particularly learned from erring more on the casual side of things from the get-go is what I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, I've also find in asking of the good questions, if you're having a conversation, and again, ultimately, what the goal is of whether you're having a podcast or a conversation, like as in like a time to talk with someone else, if the end goal of the outcome is, hey, I want to extract as much information from this person about a particular topic, and you have a certain amount of time, get yourself out of the way. Get yourself in as quick as possible. Ask the relevant things. People are not there to listen to you as the individual trying to ask these questions. Go on your merry way with a lot of things. I think I found that a lot of the times in a lot of older conversations where I would find myself kind of explaining my own story or an example from my end. And it kind of helps a little bit, but not a lot. And when I reflect sometimes back on that, I go, did I really need to add that to eat? Did that like fulfill my own, ego or self thought that I think that might be useful? Or should I really have gone, cool, translate that to the next question or to the next following point, which is what, again, people like a Tim Ferriss and others who have a almost storyline type of conversation do really well, where they can kind of link and go, awesome, we're here, now let's go here, continue on. And that's the difference between a really good interviewer and people thinking that you're doing an interview, where it's Tim Ferriss does it really well. He allows, when it's an interview, for it to create, the storyline gets created really nicely, and he helps guide people along that way. We're not there yet. Both of us, we're just mere mortals. We're not.
I try and do it.
We try to do it, but to the level that some really expert people do it, no, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
However,
he's got.
We kind of know that's sort of the end, but there's then the conversation aspect of it, and then that's the expectation where, okay, audience or the two people having like that actual conversation is not an interview. And so maybe, going into that chat with the family guys, it's, hey, no, the expectations here is we're just going to talk. It's just going to be an equivalent of something like a Joe Rogan or similar. People are just chatting, having a drink. You're talking about topics. You might go off one path. You expect both parties to have a bit of a back and forth. That's a different thing altogether. And in particular, when it comes to good questions, the informal questions, I think, are generally easier to create than the more formal good questions. Because an informal question, it kind of feels right because you're just in the flow, just like if you're chatting to mates and friends and whatnot. And I find that a lot in our meanderings chats. Dude, when we're doing meanderings, I don't have to have any notes. I don't have to have any prep. It's easy. I can have that conversation very, very easily. And I feel if I had a conversation with somebody else and it was in the meanderings format, it'd be really quite straightforward. But there is maybe an extra level of energy of putting in the work in a very interview style setting where you go, okay, good questions. You need both a lot of the science and the prep, and you need a lot of the art of maybe it's really listening in when you're doing an interview or a podcast or having that conversation. Because even honestly, personally, I'm going way back into when we first did our interviews. I remember, when I'd be doing a conversation with someone, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I've got this next question that's like reeling in my head, or I've got it on my paper, and that's what the next thing I've got to ask. And he's talking about something, and I'm like, oh shit, have I lost my position and whatnot? You can really get yourself lost in that. And that's the balance between, okay, you've prepared something, but now do you have to be flexible to, okay, now I've got to go down this path that has been put forward by this individual that guest who I'm talking to, because that's the logical next step.
Mm-hmm. I think the meanderings are perhaps different just in that you know me really well. We've got 20 years of history. There's if you were trying to replicate that with someone who you kind of only just know a little bit, I'm not sure how well that would come across. Maybe with you it'd be okay because you're a bit more charismatic than me, but I certainly would struggle without having any note. I mean, hell, even with Brendan, who I get on really well with, and I haven't known him that long, but we're really good friends. Even when he was on, I still made sure I had notes. And this was the other thing related to style. I really try and have a kind of 3 sections and make sure there's a kind of lead in from one to the other, even if they're really strange, different topics, completely opposite, handstanding and Taoism. Or coach. I think that was kind of the 3 that I had. There was the teaching and coaching, handstanding, and then Taoism with Emmett Lewis. Then they're not necessarily linked. The handstand and coaching, yes, but the Taoism, how do you do that? I had to think about that for a while to try and find a way, and then sometimes you just don't, and so you're just like, that's when you just announce, so like changing topic.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that. And is it art? Is it science? You almost have to know how to go between topics that might not be super related. And just even, what you said there, it's almost building up a little list somewhere of, okay, how do I transition between one topic to another? Is it, yeah, awesome, next topic. Is it, let's put a pause here and let's go and visit this particular section? There's all these little different ways that you can do that. But I felt this in the pressure of having a conversation with someone that you really care about having a conversation, that can go out the window because you're just thinking a million miles an hour. You don't kind of know what's going on. I don't know how you get over that apart from just pure practice, just doing it with a lot of people.
Yeah, pretty much, man. Pretty much.
Which is why I guess my example for me, I guess I'll summarize it here from an interviewing or asking the right questions. I found that, at least for me personally, and I think this is what someone else out there has to do, I know that within myself, I'm not the best person to ask really hard-hitting, straight to the point, well-researched questions. Can I do that? Yeah. But I don't see myself being the best interviewer in that format. Like Alex Friedman, you might go ahead and find a lot of information, ask that question, get some information, kind of listen in, and then use the research to then ask another question. No, that's not where I'm strong at. But where I'm strong at, and I think it's just because I've built it up over a lot of time, is that ability to go almost slightly free-flowing, where I'm coming in with enough research that I know what I'm talking about, enough of an idea of what's the person on the other end really wanting to get out of this conversation. And with that almost loose structure going, cool, let's start with somewhere strong, and then allowing it to become a very flexible conversation, which is where my strong point lies. I can talk about whatever it may be as long as it's flexible enough. As soon as you put too much structure into it, I'm gonna find issues because I'm not a creature of structure, mere mortals. Weirdly enough, even though a lot of my life can be very disciplined, when it comes to conversations, structure too much, it'll be go all shit. So that's probably how I'd summarize mine.
Your favorite evenings out and about haven't been, we're going to go to here, then we're going to go to here, and then we're going to go to here. No, they've been chaotic messes. So just like I definitely, chaotic mess.
Weirdly enough, I really like my discipline. But I also really I almost grew in the chaos and enjoy the chaos a lot in a lot of other, not in all the places, but in a lot of states, for sure.
Everything in moderation, including moderation.
Exactly. What about you? How would you summarize your...
So ultimately, I don't want to be an interviewer nor a journalist. So very similar to you. I don't want to spend the bulk of my week researching and then having an interview style show. That's not the kind of thing I find interesting. It's just, honestly, for me, that's exhausting doing that. And some here and there I think is fine, just to kind of sharpen the tools, make sure you're still doing it, getting a chance to meet new people. But by and large, I would much rather have 15 of those a year, so maybe less, one a month. And then if I did, another 42 or 40 of just repeat guests, I would much rather that. And that's kind of the way I want to do things in the future. I would much rather, I don't want to spend all this time, energy, and research for someone I'm only going to have on once. I don't want to do that. I want to try and do that with people who I will want to have on again. So you can see this with Pete Smithson. You can see this with Alex Watanabe, Dave Jones. Basically everyone that I've had on, barring some at the very start, which was when we were just cutting our teeth. We were just getting on whoever we could. Juan was just getting on these random chicks that he'd met at, I can't even remember where you met them at.
It was Mac Fitness.
That's the one, Mac Fitness. Yeah, Juan was doing all sorts of stuff with them back in the day. And I a lot of those people, that was just pure practice. It was just, these are people who are handy. They want to come on. It's kind of interesting, but now it's very much when I want to chat with someone, I want it to be, I would chat with them again in the future, assuming it all goes well and assuming they want to chat with me, So yeah, very much a reason why it's called conversations and not interviews. Mere Mortals conversations, not interviews.
Correct.
I feel the carryover onto everyday life is actually pretty strong though. I think doing this has actually helped me a lot with not even the kind of game aspect, like talking to women and things like that, but even just being able to get comfortable talking with random people it's really good, because that's essentially what you're doing when you get a guest on and you've never met them before, especially if they're overseas. There's just an aspect of like, oh, this is a complete stranger, and yet here we are. And usually there's some sort of link, but we've both, I think, had cold approaches where we just emailed them out of somewhere or sent them an Instagram message, and they're like, yeah, okay, cool, yep, let's do it. So yeah, will it help you in group settings though? No. Social faux pas still abound. I was giving Juan a couple of examples of this that I've done recently. Just group settings, that's a completely different ball game, which is also why after doing the one with the family guys, I didn't want to do that again. I think that's the only one I've done where I've had two guests on at the same time. I did it with Hosky in Vegas, so I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that again. It's just too complicated.
Yeah, it doesn't motivate me, to be honest. I definitely do want to have it when it's interviews and conversations. I want it to be one-on-one. I don't really want to have like a group of people, and I can see the fun that it might be. Like you see it in the Joe Rogan with a big group, but I go, I'm not capable. I'm just not capable to be able to handle that in that sort of format. Dude, I can do that all day long in an informal setup. Not when I know there's enough of a structure that I need to do. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Look,
my last one was, and how do you get better at it? Well, obviously practice. That's probably the main one. Also, just listening more. That's probably one of the reasons why this actually works really well for me. I've always been a much better listener than a talker, and I think that's actually a really good skill to have when you're having interview / conversations, because that's kind of what we're doing. It's not pure conversation, otherwise we'd just be coming in randomly, and neither is it a full interview. We're in that kind of gray zone between the two, and that's where just being a better listener, just saying something and then just listening and not trying to butt in with your own thoughts. Or who was someone who was really Gary Vee.
Gary Vee.
He's always doing that.
Let's talk about this. Yeah. You'll just jump in and go, okay, cool. Yeah. We're moving on to something else, which would be a really good skill set I think in person, if you kind of want to just move things along. Not even a single bit when it comes into an interview.
Bring your mic closer.
Doesn't work at all when you're going through and trying to do it in terms of a podcast or interview or anything like that, because you're just not getting the right type of value. And so I mean, those clear examples. But just to straying your point, I think we started the podcast in 2019. We really started doing a lot of conversations. Was it early 2020? I think it was something like that.
Yeah. Well, it was we had here, so maybe even mid-ish 2020, April, May, probably something like that.
And look, and to be frank, so what's that? We've probably been doing conversations on and off for 3 years. Again, we talked about at the very beginning. We've done 90 odd conversations. I would say we're still in the intermediate phase, right? And that's 3 years, almost 400. Like in total, we've probably done.
It hasn't been our main focus.
Like we've probably done in excess of 1,000 hours of conversations on a podcast platform.
But we're getting
it'd be getting close to 1,000. If you think about it, some of the conversations are 2 hours. A lot of the normal podcasts are an hour. Book reviews half an hour.
I'd probably say more close to 750 than 1,000 if I had to guess.
So in terms of hours put in, look, it's been a lot. But I go, man, we're just scratching the surface in terms of, unless you're naturally gifted, whatever. But you just got to put in, you just got to practice. And, if anyone was to ask me, if any Mere Mortalite was to say, hey, I listened to this interview, it went really well, I'd kind of go, it was probably in part that I cared enough about it to go and do some research. I was curious enough about it. And I was really glad that I've talked shit and talked to people and talked in interviews for X amount of years for that particular moment for it to go really well. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have gone my way in terms of, the luck level. It probably would have swayed towards you're out of luck and it would have been a piece of shit conversation. So, you sometimes have to stack it in your favor.
What's the worst ones you've ever heard? So Lex and Jocko is pretty up there. I think the other worst ones I'm trying to think of would be, those Fox News segments where it just ends up with everyone shouting at each other.
Yeah, well, anything I think now of,
and maybe some
TV
cringe
or-
ones. I'm always really uncomfortable. The Between Two Ferns with
with
Zach
Zach
Galifianakis.
Galifianakis.
I never enjoyed them. I get it. I get what he's trying to do, but even then I'm still just like, oh.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Don't make me watch
It would
this.
probably be a combination of some TV show or something like that. Have you got any, as a final call out, have you've gone like, that was the greatest conversation interview I've just ever heard?
I mean, going back to Adam Curry again, the first one he did with Joe Rogan blew my socks off. But that was more just because I found Adam a fascinating guy. I thought he was just so cool. I don't know if that was, Joe Rogan lets him shine for sure, but I don't know if that was the greatest that I've ever seen. That's a lot harder for me because it's just tapped up with, maybe I just really enjoy this person. Maybe it's just a style or a format that's particular to me. So
yeah. And look, this is going to be a weird one for me as well because I'll answer it, right? So, knowing me, am I going to say something like a Tim Ferriss podcast or is it a Lex Friedman podcast? And it was really informative and they're all good. But to be honest, if I had to go, what was the best one? It tends to be just the funny ones. It tends to be a Joe Rogan conversation with Theo Von or with another comedian or some other comedic thing. Or that to me, I go, it ends up being almost like a comedy show, special / podcast interview. And it's got a mixture of enough cool questions that are interesting with a lot of just fun anecdotes. And I go, I generally find myself listening to those while I'm driving or something else and just genuinely like laughing and enjoying and like re-listening to them. I go, I kind of like them the most. And I think more so, I want to try and replicate them in a similar sense. Not obviously the exact same way in terms of just comedians, but as I continue to have conversations with Jeffs or someone else, I want it to be more in the lightheartedness, but still trying to get a lot of information through.
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I think we'll summarize. I think we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there, folks. So thank you very much for tuning in again to the Musings today, all around asking questions, being a good interviewer, what not to look out for, what we don't like, how we're just shitting on Andrew Huberman, having a chat with Tim Ferriss. I'm sorry, Andrew, but it's a reality. If people want to send us through,
some people shouldn't be interviewers.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a reality. If you thought any part of this conversation was valuable to you, we talked about it already over the Boostagram Lounge there in the middle of the podcast, but you can support us once again through sending through a Boostagram, and that is a message attached to some Satoshis sent through directly. Now you can use things like Castomatic, Fountain, any podcasting platforms out there that enable you to participate in the Value for Value space. Current's Value for Value Season 3 is going to be coming out very shortly. In fact, if you're listening to this out of the live tuning in right now, it should be out. So go and check into that. You can go check out the previous conversations on the Value for Value if you want. But once again, it's participating in that space helps us out, and we're helping out the ecosystem as well. We're going to be putting out ways that you can support us in other more regular ways. So that's sort of a fiat system of PayPal. But again, we really want you to be supporting us through that Boostagram model. It's kind of where we see the future going with podcasts or platforms in general, or conversations. So it would mean a lot to us if you can support us in that way.
Definitely. Yeah. Nothing to add.
There you go. Well, Mere Mortalites, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for tuning in. Once again, Musings, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I hope you can join us next time live. But for now, we're going to go out. Mere Mortalites, Juan out.
Kyron out. For real. Crash.